Hello and welcome to the Football Manager Files. I'm here with one of England's most experienced managers, Sam Allardyce. He took Bolton into Europe, he took West Ham back to the Premier League, and he's now here at Sunderland. Sam, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
You're approaching your 25th year as a football manager. What is it about this job that you love so much?
25 years. I don't know where they've all gone, to be first, perfectly honest with you, but I think that as a football manager, following on from a professional player, has been a great experience and a great joy for me in the main. I think that you don't know how good a manager you're going to be when you first set off in the coaching world and do your coaching badges and do your management courses and so on and so forth to try and prepare you. Nothing really prepares you to get behind the desk, apart from there are some key factors in those courses that you do take notice of and do try and apply, but survival is the name of the game when you first start, and as you go on and as the game evolves more and more, is staying ahead or certainly with change. And the game has changed so much in that period of time from where I started. It's unrecognisable now to compared to what it was 25 years ago.
You mentioned when you started out there, you started at Limerick and worked your way through the divisions, now coached some of the biggest clubs in the country. That seems rarer now. Do you think there's any particular reason for that?
A lack of patience, I think. Football clubs, football clubs' expectation and strive for quick success leaves you in a very delicate position where it becomes all about results. And the only way you can keep your job is by winning, no matter how you win in the end. So patience is less, so that gives you less time to build from within. And I'm still of the opinion that at the very least, at a football club, as a manager, as a new manager or a new head coach, it takes a minimum of 2 years to get to really where you want to get, probably 3. And if you can get through that long and you can get through that period of time, you will have built on and off the field something that would be sustainable for that football club or more successful than it's been before.
Going back to your time at Bolton when you first came into the Premier League, you were famously one of the first coaches to use data heavily.
Yeah.
How big a sea change was that in the way that Premier League managers worked at that time?
I think that in 2000, when we first acquired the data, it was how and what do you do with it? And we spent a huge amount of time with the backroom staff compiling that data in the right manner that for us. So you got a huge amount of data coming to you. How are you going to break it down, and what areas you're going to put it into? Make it more accessible for your coaches and your players to understand it. So we spent a huge amount of time breaking that data down and putting it in this logistic format so players and coaches could understand it, and then start building on that data by saying what does this data give us to plan to beat the opposition. So we have the opposition's data when we play them, so we save that data over the years to look at what they do, what are our players doing on a week-to-week basis, so we can then plot the top performance of our players. What does it look like, and then we can show that to the player, as well as using your experience and your eye on the game, which is always going to be important. The match itself, it's then backed up by the data after that. As coaches, you learn from that. Players, you can show that, and then you can go out and do more practices in those areas to either strengthen what is a very good part of the game or cover a little bit of a weakness, you know. And so as a learning tool, if the player accepts it, it's much easier to get him to play better on the basis of a coach, manager, stroke data to go with it that actually is a monitoring system on how the players performing week in and week out.
And did you encounter any resistance when you were first using
Early
it?
days, it was, yeah, but resistance was overcome by the fact that the room wasn't something they feared to go into or attend. It was going to show them what they were doing, but it wasn't going to show them too many negatives, which was a tendency in managers and coaches to go to the negative side far too much. We would show a few obviously negatives about the mistakes we might have made, but then we would go into what the positives were, and we devised the sort of pre-match analysis of the team to say, if we play like this, we will have an opportunity to beat the opposition, because we would have to stop these strengths that they have, and we'd have to try and expose these weaknesses that they have, and if we can do that, it'll give you an opportunity to win the football match. Of course, the player himself, his responsibility is to play his best performance. You always need that. But the post-match then reviews whether did you do any of that, and if you did some of that, did it expose them like we thought it would? Did we get behind them, or did we get through them, or did we switch the play quick enough? And was that one of the reasons why we actually won or drew the game? And that was very easy to sell to the players eventually, and they took a huge amount of notice of that, where there were lots of them going off to the data analysis lads and looking at their own performances, and obviously it still is a fantastic tool that everybody's using now, but for me it's all about how you use the data to your benefit.
At Bolton, you were kind of regulars in the top 8, League Cup final, first time the club had been in Europe. Was there a particular secret to your success at that point?
Recruitment.
In terms of players?
Players, yeah. I mean, the fact that we would, in the early stages, take some gambles. We were prepared to gamble. Managers get very apprehensive about gambling on players, because it's make or break for you, because if your player in is not as good as the player out, then it's very quickly going to reflect on you as a manager, you know, by the fact that you're weakening the side by the player that you've bought in from the player that you've allowed to go. So that then was the first and one of the big sides of such a successful period, by the fact that then when we recruited the player, we made him feel good.
Was it easy to bring in the likes of Djorkaeff and Okocha? Did you have to convince them?
Well, we convinced them by going, in the main, flying out to their part of the world, in their environment, and telling them all about what we were trying to achieve and what we were trying to do. And of course, the big plus was, you're going to come and play in the Premier League, and you're going to come and play in the best league in the world, and no doubt about it, the most enjoyable league. That's not just me saying that, that's all the players generally from abroad that we recruit. I remember signing Nicholas Anelka from Fenerbahce, and he said, do you know, he said, there's no league like the Premier League. And if you think that Nicholas has left to play for Real Madrid and Germany and Turkey and France, and he China, he went to China after us, but he couldn't wait to get back to the Premier League, because he'd experienced all the top level of the other leagues, and for him the best one was the Premier League. So that's a big pull for the players, and those players came and really did an outstanding job with the quality and the experience that they had at the time.
In terms of approaching individual games, how do you prepare tactically? Is there anything you always do ahead of each game, in terms of scouting, in terms of giving information to players?
It changes from time to time. I mean, generally we never really play the same way twice, because I'm pragmatic in the term that we have to assess all the opposition's strengths and weaknesses, so we may have to be capable of adjustment within our framework to try and beat them, and the players have to try and take that on board. It may be the same system, may look like the same system, but we may ask players to do a different type of job than would have done the week before. When you're sometimes, dealing with an unfair level of, you've spent 30, 40 million, where as Man United on Saturday spent 350 million, then from a financial point of view, you shouldn't have a chance. They should wipe the floor with you and win handsomely. But if tactically you can get your team to approach the game the right way, and put those tactics in place, then they can cause Manchester United problems and even beat them on the day, which is why the Premier League is so exciting. But you as a coach and me as a coach, being from a pragmatic point of view, it's always adjustment for the team. So the build-up would be, this is this game, for this game, we are going to try and achieve that. This is how we try and achieve it, and get the players ready to try and do it.
In terms of when you've taken over clubs, a couple of times you've been appointed mid-season with the task of turning around the club's fortunes. How big a challenge is that in terms of leadership?
It's a difficult task because you're dealing with a complete new set of players that you've had no responsible bringing to the football club. Obviously, you've got to build a relationship with those players as quickly as you can, and you have to earn the respect of those players, because players are very quick to find out how good you are as a manager. They're very testing, and I think if you earn their respect, then they are quickly going to be on your side to try and help us all get out the position that you come in at. And generally, when you come into a football club, it comes in when it's struggling badly. And you've got to try and reinvigorate the club and build the confidence of the players. There's probably a lack of confidence. And while we've still in the bottom three, I think we've done that, but not quite achieved as many results as I expected. But it's a difficult task. Staff behind the scenes is always another delicate one, because you don't know the way they work. You don't know whether they'll work your way or whether combined to your philosophy. So you have to look at that very, very quickly, and hopefully you don't have to make too many changes in that department, because it's hard enough making changes in the squad without making changes in season to the staff behind the scenes. So you set yourself out and you set out your standards, and you ask both on and off the field for those players and those staff to live up to your standards. And unfortunately, if I think they can't, then I have to do something about it.
And is there a first thing you always do when you're appointed to a club? Any real priorities?
Speak to everybody and say, we're all here because of football, because of the players on the field. That's why we're employed. We're employed for them to do as well as they possibly can. Whatever department you work in, it's very important you do that job you do very well for the benefit of the players. A football club is all about the players. I think there's a tendency for that to get lost at some football clubs today. I think here we're all focused on one thing, and that's making and hoping that the players get the club and keep the club in the Premier League this year, and then try and build on that. But speaking to the staff straight away and then speaking to the players is very important, and then speaking to the players individually and listening to what they have to say. Have they got any problems? If they have, why did they have a problem? Was it a problem in football terms, or was it a problem away from football? As those are the key elements to find out quickly on how you're going to help the player get better. And a lot of the problems that players have when they're not performing very well actually lie off the field, not actually in the training or on the pitch. So unless you know about it, you can't deal with it.
And once you've had a transfer window or two to recruit your own players and build your own side, is there a particular type of player you always want to have in your side?
A captain, if you can find one. Rare today. A good captain in the dressing room. John O'Shea's a good captain. Sometimes slightly quieter than I'd perhaps like, but a good captain. Certainly, that is a key element, because if they're controlling the dressing room in terms of mediating between you and the dressing room, And I'm not talking about telling tales here. I'm talking about the fact that they can make sure the players are all pulling in the same direction. And as a captain, put a stop to that niggly relationship between two players maybe, or whatever it might be, that so it doesn't have to get to the manager, it doesn't have to be blown up all out of proportion, so the manager has to deal with it. And then on the field, they're playing a captain's role as well. And then the quality of the player in whatever position they play. And more importantly now, the age. I think the age is reducing. I think the 30 plus players now playing in the Premier League has reduced dramatically over the last 4 or 5 years, which shows the physical capabilities needed today to survive at this level of football.
And has that changed for you in particular? Because at Bolton you had a reputation for bringing in slightly older players. Are you looking to do that less?
Well, not really. I mean, that's a misconception actually, because they weren't older players at the time. There was Yuri, Fernando Hierro, and Gary Speed. Mm-hmm. They were in the late 30s, whereas Ivan Campo was 26, JJ Kocher was 28, Kevin Davis was 27, Stelios Yiannakopoulos was 29. So that was a misconception that the players were older players. They were actually all under 30. And those players I just mentioned then cost me in total, grand total, Bruno Ngotti 500,000. The rest were free transfers. I know I'd all had problems at the clubs they were with, except for Gary Speed. He didn't have a problem. He just decided to leave on the basis that he wanted a new challenge. He thought he was going to get forced out at Newcastle because they bought Nicky Butt. Mm-hmm. So there was a misconception about the older players we had. Like I said, Fernando Hierro, Yuri Yokayev and Gary Speed, but all the rest when they started with us were under 30, which meant we could keep them for 3, 4 and 5 years. That's why we became as successful as we were.
Looking at how the job's changed over the course of your period in the Premier League, have you found the increased media scrutiny made it a more difficult job for you as a manager?
I think socially media-wise more difficult. I think that's the biggest change of all the social media activity that happens today. I think that is the level of control to try and have over all of that is massive at a football club. I think it's taken the best part of 3 years to stop players reacting to tweets of abuse. Because if they've reacted to tweets of abuse, instead of the abuser getting sorted out, the player gets fined by the FA. You know, so the control of it, if you want to be a social media active-wise, the self-control needed is massive, because you cannot respond to the criticism that you're going to get via that social media site. And if you do, you'll end up being fined. You can't post or put out too much regarding breaking confidentiality. The players have to be aware of that. And of course, from a player, more importantly, they can't go anywhere and they can't do anything, because somebody takes a click or a quick photo, and it may be the harmless thing on everybody. If it's caught in the wrong context, it can be blown out of all proportion. So they've got very little time for anybody else other than themselves and the family now. So social media is the biggest change. Yes, our media responsibilities have got greater, but you have to accept those media responsibilities, because we're demanding more and more money to allow people to produce and deliver on the TV, on the radio, through social media, through websites, through the club's own website. So we have to accept there's a bigger responsibility for that. So we accept that as managers, and like I said, we want to be the players more sensible and more control about what they do socially media. And
you mentioned the increased money in the game. Has it been at all more difficult to motivate players now they're earning incredible sums?
Not for me. It's not been difficult to motivate a player for me. There's a difficulty in a player's reaction sometimes where you fall out. You know, and then if that becomes irreparable, you move the player on, and you go to the owners and say, you know, we've tried, we don't get on, we disagree on certain things, whether it be football wise or any other. So we move the player on as quickly as we possibly can. But players in general are always motivated to try and achieve what they dream about achieving, and that's winning. They all want to win, but whether you're good enough to win at this level is a different kettle of fish. This is the big demand. The big demand is how good you've got to be to win on a regular basis today.
And lastly, just finishing off, now you've been around for, well, I don't want to say
donkey's
25 years again.
Donkey's years, yeah.
But one of the most experienced managers in Premier League history, I think the 5th most games you've taken charge of. Do younger managers come to you now for advice? Some
do. I think that some still ring us up, of course. And my problem is we don't have enough British managers getting the chance to manage at the top level anymore. I think that they're ignored, sadly. And there's many young managers making their way down below in the lower divisions now. And the only way it looks like they can achieve Premier League status is by getting their club promoted to the Premier League, and on that basis, that's very difficult. Even more so, I think, when the money gets bigger next year, because our money goes beyond our wildest dreams, which means that the guys down in the Championship won't have as much money to compete when they get into the Premier League, so that makes life more difficult for them. And rarely are they considered for any of the top jobs now. It's more talked about the foreign coach, and for me it's always a battle that the young managers have to accept and take on as best they possibly can, and go out and prove that they're good enough to manage at the top level. I did it, so if you go through the heartache and you've got the desire and the determination and you're good at what you do, you can get there in the end, even though sometimes you don't believe you can or you won't get the chance. But if you keep proving in a job at whatever level that you're successful and you make the team more successful, somebody will take notice of it and give you a chance.
That's great. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
And thank you for watching this episode of The Football Files. If you enjoyed this, you'll find more details of more of our interviews on screen now.